Good morning, everybody. Uh, we'll be starting in just a little bit here, but I wanted to kind of give you a moment to have people hop on and um, begin to get comfortable, and we'll get started with our training, our live stream right now on the brain, autism, and play. If you're joining us from the welcome. We're excited to be one of the supporting sponsors of the expo and looking forward to connecting with you guys there. And then for you guys who are not at the expo, you can certainly still, I think you can still register and go check out. There's a bunch of different organizations that are there to be able to help families and individuals with autism. And and you can also chat with us here on YouTube or on Facebook so that we can connect. So, with that, let's kind of wait a couple minutes and then we'll kind of get started with our presentation. But welcome, everybody. I'm going to get our slides up and we'll get started in just a second here. So, um, just going to kind of look at my screen, make sure we have people kind of popping on. And today we're going to be talking about and how to be able to use the latest science of brain development and the power of relationships to be able to support your child's growth. So I'm excited to be able to present this for you guys. Once we're done, it should be available on YouTube for you to kind of watch again on our YouTube channel. And so I invite you guys to, play back and, get any of the information that you'd like once you get a chance to kind of see it. So with that, let's go ahead and kind of get started. I'll tell you a little bit about myself. So my name is Benny Delgado. I am founder of Leaps and Bounds Family Services. I founded Leaps and Bounds back in 2005. And we're a therapy practice that specializes in relationship-based type of intervention that is family-centered. At the core, we um, partner with families. The reason I started the practice was because I saw that there was a need to be able to, the center point of what we do is to engage parents to help them with everyday challenges that they're having, right? And teaching the parents and helping support them through day-to-day things that may be difficult for their children. So we work with all different kinds of children. My background is in specifically in applied psychology. I have a degree in applied psychology. I am a developmental therapist. I'm going on my 26th year coming up this year. And my initial work for the first 7 or 8 years of my life are doing therapy was working with children with autism. So it's an area of expertise of mine and something that I quite enjoy. I've had an opportunity to learn from many families and many individuals who have autism that have really kind of helped shape the way we provide services at Leaps and Bounds. I'm also the past president of the Illinois Developmental Therapy Association. I served there for 8 years and led our statewide organization that mentors and supports developmental therapists that provide that service here in Illinois. Um, I'm also on the Illinois Interagency Council of Early Intervention. I'm a provider representative appointed by the governor. And so I do a lot of work, good, high quality services in the birth to three services of Illinois for children, and then also, do some work in the early childhood work as well. So that you see here at the bottom of the page, feel free to reach out to us on Twitter, Facebook. This is the first time I'm doing a live YouTube stream. And so I kind of like it. I think maybe we'll do some more of these. And so you can subscribe to our YouTube channel and we'll put up little posts and try and do some more free trainings for families because the cost of delivering services to children with autism is extremely high and is very stressful for parents. And we try to do whatever we can to make sure that we make things accessible and affordable so that everybody has equal access. And get some inspiration and some stuff from us there as well. So I always like to begin by inviting everyone here to be able to contribute to the discussion. Usually, when I do these things in person, I have a large audience, and we kind of have this back and forth chatting going on. Um, and so I've learned over the years that everyone has an inner teacher. And people in the audience, parents, can provide information that can be helpful to each other. Individuals who have autism that may be watching this can also give input and tell us from your perspective. Other therapists. It's always great for us to have an exchange of information going. So go ahead and use the chat feature on YouTube and comment if you're logged in. If not, you can log in and go back and watch it again and leave us some chats. I'll be kind of watching the chat here and there to kind of see comments, and feel free to contribute, okay? Because we all kind of learn from each other. So our objectives for today is to kind of go over some basic brain science, and we want to talk a little bit about the kind of the role that relationships have on the development of the brain in children, and also think about the power of play, because play has a really important role as well in brain development and brain architecture. So we're going to kind of go through these type of things in the next hour that we have together. So let's go ahead and dig right in. Brain science. We are living in a very exciting time when it comes to brain science, at least for me, who's kind of a brain geek around this type of stuff. And over the last 30 years, we have learned a lot about the brain and the different parts of the brain. We've learned a lot about the emotional regulation process that happens in the brain and the critical role that it has in development of young children. We've also learned a lot about the role of caregivers in relationship and the really important role that they have in making sure that they can actually shape the brain. You can actually build the way that the brain works. The impact of trauma and stress is another really important thing that we've learned over the last 10 years. We've really kind of really digged into this a little bit. And I think this is particularly important. We're not doing enough talking about trauma and stress for individuals with autism, of general stress right now under the pandemic and all those type of things. But day to day, things can be extremely stressful for individuals with autism. From me talking to individuals who have autism, they will tell me about some of the day-to-day things that are stressful for them. And so it's a really important thing to keep in mind, because it does affect the way that the brain functions and brain architecture. We've also learned a lot about what type of experiences help make connections in the brain and build the brain. And a tremendous amount of science, again, in the last 10 years around the emotions and the brain. They call this affective neuroscience. And so we'll dig into a couple of these topics. This is a very big, meaty topic, and I do a whole series of trainings on these. But I wanted to kind of give you guys just a high-level overview of some things, and then maybe in the future we can kind of dig into some details if you guys find this helpful. So let's begin to talk a little bit about kind of how the brain grows. So this graphic kind of shows a little bit about the size of the brain. So when a child is born, right at birth, the size of the brain, all the structures are already there intact, and the size of the brain is about 25% of what the full-grown size of an adult brain is going to be. Already at birth, you have 25% of the size of the brain. By the time you're 3 years old, your brain is already 85% of the size and weight of an adult. And by the time you're 5 years old, you're about 90% of the way there. So you can see that the brain is growing extremely rapidly. And it's supposed to, because that's when they say, like, children are sponges. They're getting information so quickly. It's environment it's going to be born into, and it has to adapt quickly. So, for example, if you have to learn multiple languages, your brain has to be equipped to be able to do that. If you're born in a situation where you have to kind of survive, right? Your brain has to equip to that situation and be able to adapt. And so that's why our brain is growing more rapidly than any other organ or piece of our body. If the rest of our body grew as fast as our brain, uh, your child would be born already at, 40 pounds, you know, which, oh, you know, it would be really hard for for mothers to give birth to a 40-pound baby. But yeah, it would be growing really, really quickly if you kept up with this pace. So that's why the head is the biggest part of the child, because the brain is growing so rapidly. So the brain not only grows in size, but it also grows in connectivity. And this is really critically important when we're talking about children with autism, and I'll explain why in a second. But there's a variety of network of neurons that are connecting in the brain, and this is where the learning is really, really happening. We're going from one part of the brain to the other. There's no one single region of the brain or area of the brain that is responsible for one particular thing. So, for example, there's not like just an emotional part of the brain where you can kind of touch and say, this is the emotions right there, or just a memory part of the brain. There's different parts of the brain that have the responsibility of hosting memories and emotions, different regions. And it's the connectedness that happens between these different parts of the brain when the neurons connect that gets these things to kind of start working in a coordinated manner. Okay? So the brain functions via these neuronal networks that start from the brain and they extend all the way through the body, through our limbs, the central nervous system, all the way through our body. And with development, as a child grows, the connections become better and stronger and more intercoordinated. So, for example, I'm going to kind of give you a little visual here. When you try something for the first time and you do it, let's say, about 10 times, I'm going to show you. It's about a neuron, just to give you an example, is about the thickness of this piece of thread. Okay? So, pretty small. It's brand new and it's easy to break, right? So, let's say your first time you learn to ride a bike, right? You get on and you practice a little bit, you fall. If you don't pick up the bike and you keep trying, the neuron doesn't get overly strong, right? And it's more likely that you'll forget how to be able to do that. But as you begin to practice the activity over and over and over again, you get back on your bike, you pedal again, you figure out the balancing, you do it for the 100,000th time, then it begins to get nice and thick, the neuron, like this. It's a piece of rope. It's my dog's leash. And virtually impossible to break, right? So this is why practice and routine is really important for children, and specifically for children on the autism spectrum, because we want to make these connections nice and strong. And so we have things that we do over and over again. You want repeated experience, right? But we're going to talk a little bit about what type of experiences really create these nice, strong neuronal connections. Okay? We'll talk about that in a little bit. But this is the way the brain kind of begins to function. We're growing both in size, and the important part is really the connectivity, because that is where all the learning really happens. So as I mentioned earlier, it's experiences that make the connections in the brain. And for better or for worse, experiences are going to make a connection, whether they're positive experiences and you have, a strong emotional, experience that is a positive one that actually connects to memory, and you have a really good, solid memory that is a pleasurable one, then that neuron is really nice and strong and connected, right? Which is why sometimes if you think back about a particular experience that you have maybe in your childhood, all of a sudden it'll bring an emotion to you. Or food is a great example, right? Food gives us emotional responses, right? Like I think about, the my mom's, enchiladas that she makes, or when she would make a lasagna. Oh, delicious, right? I could even kind of smell it, and it gives you this emotional response of happiness, right? Likewise, you know, negative experiences, or experiences that are stressful, can also create really strong connections in our brain. So think about, I'll give you an example for me. I hate roller coasters, right? And I remember being on, like one of the carnivals, one of those little, roller coasters or tilt-a-whirl things, and it was spinning around. I felt like I was gonna throw up. I hated the experiences. Nowadays, I won't go anywhere near Great America or any of those places, right? You're not gonna get me in. It's a negative experience for me, and I didn't enjoy it. And so my connection for those type of experiences, anything that is, you know adventurous, um, is a negative one, and I will avoid it on all fronts. Okay, so just an example that experiences begin to create these connections for better or for worse. So if we have traumatic experiences, we're going to have traumatic output in the way that we behave. We have positive ones, we're going to have positive output. So I also wanted to talk a little bit about three major regions of the brain. And this is really important to keep in mind when we also think about individuals with autism. But this is something that is for all of us. Um, all of us as individuals, or when we were children, are using these three main parts of the brain. The first part at the bottom of this graphic, it's the brain stem and the cerebellum. In this area of the brain, we control most of our vital um, functions for our body. Our blood pressure, our breathing rate, our heart rate, all of those type of things are happening in this part of the brain, right? All the things that we need for survival. Um, there are children that I've worked with that are born without, the missing top parts of their brain here, and this bottom part of the brain is maintaining all of their life. Now the next section of the brain is in the middle, and you can't really see it. It's kind of this orange part where the brainstem is, but it kind of goes up into the blue part, and it's kind of goes in between our ears a little bit. It's called the midbrain. Now the midbrain is where we have all of our emotional centers of our brain. A lot of it lives there. It's in other places too, but this central region in between the brain there is where we're having a lot of our feelings part of our brain. And I call it the I love brain. And then the top part that you see here, the blue part, is the functional thinking is happening. And so all our reasoning, our problem solving, all of those type of things are happening up at the top there. Oops, didn't mean to turn that. And so we're going to use Dr. Dan Siegel's model of the brain, the hand model of the brain, to kind of express how this kind of works and why this is important. Because these three parts of the brain don't work at the same time. They can't work simultaneously. So when you have the brain stem, let's think about your wrist here and the part of your palm. This is where all your fight or flight functions are going to be happening as well, right? When fight or flight gets activated, you can't be feeling, which is the center part of the brain here, and you can't be thinking, the forebrain up here at the top, because you need to act. If you have a tiger chasing you, you gotta either decide you're gonna freeze, play dead, you're gonna run, or you're gonna fight it. One or the other. You can't think too long. So you're using all of this bottom part of the brain, and it's made that way for you to be able to survive. The feelings part of the brain, when you're in emotion, is another time where you can't be in fight or flight, because you really can't be attuned to those feelings, and you also can't be thinking, which is why I call it the emotion, the I love you part of the brain. Because this is the time where our parents are telling us, let's say you fall in love with somebody and they're telling you, like, this person's not good for you, and you're like, but I love them, right? You're not thinking straight sometimes, right? And so your top part of the brain isn't working, and neither is your fight or flight, because you're in emotions. And the thinking part of the brain that kind of covers it all keeps you focused. You can't be overly feely and in emotions, and you can't be in fight or flight to be able to focus with your day-to-day tasks, work, whatever you may be dealing with. Oftentimes with children, what we see is when they're having intense behaviors, the fight or flight system is being activated, or the emotion center is activated, and the kids flip their lid, right? They stop thinking. And so we oftentimes, when we're trying to address behaviors, our natural inclination is to try and um, teach them what to do, but it's very hard to be successful that way because you're not addressing the feelings or the fight or flight. You're trying to work from the top part of the brain and getting the reasoning happening, but they flip their lid, and it's not until you get that back on again, they're not going to be able to respond. Now, this happens, again, it's not just kids with autism. I'm applying this to children with autism, but this happens to, you know, it happens to us as adults. It happens to, us as kids. Just think about it when you're having an interaction with your partner or your spouse, and they come up and talk to you, and you just lose it. You start yelling at them. Maybe you're too stressed out and you didn't mean to. You stopped kind of thinking for a moment, right? So that's how this kind of three major parts of the brain kind of work, and we'll refer back to it a little bit later. But I wanted to kind of give you at least a little overview of how this functions. Now, the next part that I want to talk to you about is how the brain develops. So keeping this in mind, what I just talked to you about, the brain develops from bottom up and back to front. From a connectivity standpoint, that's typically the way that the brain is developing. The lower functions of the brain, the hindbrain and the midbrain, are the ones that are typically most developed when children are younger. And then as we grow, we start to get the higher order thinking part of our brain. Now, believe it or not, we'd like to think that kids get this fairly early, but we are continually developing the higher order thinking part of our brain well into our 20s, which is why we made a lot of dumb decisions when we were in teenagers or early college years, because we weren't always using our thinking part of the brain, and it wasn't always fully connected just yet. So we have a good excuse for doing what we did. But one of the reasons I bring this up when it comes to working with children with autism is because to take a top-down approach. So we see the issues that children are having, and we try and kind of teach it, or trying to kind of teach them what to do. And sometimes that can be helpful, but you have to make sure that the bottom parts of the brain are well connected first. So over the years of me kind of learning about brain development, we started to take a bottom up approach. So we take a look at how is a child developing from the bottom functions. How well are they regulating? How well are they connected with you emotionally? Because we'll talk about the role of relationship in a little while, but that's a critical part of brain development that all children have to go through in order to be able to access the thinking part of their brain. And when you work from the bottom up, the skills begin to kind of emerge in a much more sequential manner and a much more natural manner as well. And it's just because of the basic science of brain, about the way that it works. You can be much more successful as a parent if you're using a bottom-up approach. Again, you can use a top-down approach where you're using some thinking type things, but you want to make sure that the child is first well-regulated and they're attuned and emotionally connected to you. So on that note, let's talk a little bit about the developmental sequence, because all of us go through a certain type of sequence in development. And it's important to kind of, from a developmental therapist standpoint, I always take a developmental approach. I say, okay, yes, the child may be, let's say 6 years old, but developmentally, where are they at in the sequence? Maybe they're developing at a little bit younger age, and the type of activities and experiences that they need to be just outside of that zone of proximal development. The area that they're currently exhibiting skills at. Because if it's too hard, then they're not going to be successful, and it's too easy, you're not going to challenge enough, right? Think about it like if your goal was to become a power lifter, right? And today you go into the gym and you can only lift 10 pounds. But I put a 100-pound weight in front of you. Not going to be too successful and you might actually hurt yourself, right? But if you're coming in right now lifting at a 10-pound weight and we kind of work up to a 15-pound weight and we build your endurance there and then we get to a 20-pound weight, little by little, we can move ourselves up to the endurance that you need to be able to go ahead and lift a 100-pound weight. So just as an analogy. But let's take a look at this graphic that kind of helps us kind of think about children's development. At the foundation, the very first thing we need is health. When a baby is born and they come out of the womb, if they're having any health issues, that takes priority. If you're struggling to breathe, if you're struggling to eat, your temperature, any of those type of things, you're going to have to address that first so that you have a nice solid foundation for them to be able to move up to the next step, which is regulation, right? If everything is great with the birth, there's no problems, your child is nice and regulated, then what happens? Or your child's nice and healthy, then they begin to regulate. You swaddle them up, right? And you bring them to nurse, and they calm down and soothe because they're all born kind of with the hands out like this and crying, right? You soothe them, and the very next thing that happens is that you get engagement. They kind of look at you for the first time, and you start talking to them and telling them how much you love them, and they may even coo back at you right at the get-go. The brain is already primed for that social interaction and engagement. So we want to think about these first three levels when we're working with individuals with autism as well. Oftentimes, when we're seeing that there's issues with how well they're being able to regulate, sometimes people think about it with their behavior because it's what you see. We want to make sure that there's no underlying health issues that is affecting that. And then if those things there's differences in the way that you experience the world, right? Your vision can be affected, how you kind of can filter out visual information. I've heard from individuals with autism, sometimes sound, sometimes smell, sometimes it's their thoughts that are racing. And so we want to make sure that we kind of are supportive in helping them regulate that. And oftentimes, believe it or not, they do a great job of trying to find ways of doing it themselves. And it's our job to kind of try and learn, why that's happening and how to be able to kind of help build off of it. That'll lead to the engagement. And then we get into good learning. So now we're starting to get into the top part of the brain, right? When we have these lower levels kind of, solidified, you're going to be able to kind of get some good solid learning. And the thing that we're always looking for, that oftentimes parents are asking me about, the final stage is communication, right? Once you get through these levels, then you're starting to get a better flow for communicating. That may be with gestures at first, and then words, or maybe sounds, and then words, then phrases. But you need all of these lower levels to kind of be in order. Now, keep in mind that this is not just like a ladder that once it's built, the stairs are there, right? This is an ever evolving process for all of us. Because think about it. There's days when you wake up and you're just not feeling well. Let's say you had the flu. Your regulation is going to be affected. And even though you may be really good at communicating, you just may not want to talk to somebody that day, right? It may affect how well you're engaging with your loved ones, right? And this happens all the time. Sometimes we get stressed. We get stressed at work. I know I've had stress during this time, during the pandemic. And as we're trying to engage with our loved ones, your regulation is just a little off, and it may be hard to be able to kind of fully be present and communicating with everybody. So this is a back and forth process, and it's important to kind of be able to be attuned to this developmental sequence and see where your child is on the developmental scale. So that leads me to talk about the interdependency, right? We as humans are born helpless, and we're one of those mammals that we're dependent upon others for survival, and we require the care of others to be able to kind of grow and learn. We don't kind of just learn by ourselves. Our brains are actually made for social interaction, for social learning, right? Think about the difference, for example, like if you see on those nature shows where a horse is born and the horse can just get up and walk, right? Babies are not like that, right? You put a baby down, that's where they're going to stay, and they're really dependent upon us. So this is why relationships plays a major role in creating those connections in the brain, right? This image right now of this dad comforting his son reminds me of, even when I was a young boy, having moments where I would get stressed out and what it felt like for my mom to be able to contain that stress. And I know that can be challenging sometimes with individuals with autism as parents are trying to kind of figure that out. But that's why it's important to kind of work with professionals that can help you figure out how to be able to kind of get this connection, right? Because there's multiple ways of soothing, even if it's not direct touch. But I remember what it felt like to be held by my mother, soothed. She would rock me in a rocking chair that we had, and she'd start to sing to me. And in that moment, I could even remember my body kind of do that little, where it kind of lets out the cry and you release, and then you just calm, right? The brain produces a bunch of neurochemicals that help us kind of calm down, that actually set us up for life to be able to deal with challenges when we experience something like this, right? To this day, when I get stressed out, I can think back to that moment and be immediately calmed. I can even smell my mom's perfume and hear her voice, right? So this is the role that relationships play in calming the brain. Now, in order to kind of get a better understanding of this, we're going to talk a little bit about stress. And I think this is a really critical thing when we're talking about individuals who have autism. Again, this is based on typical development. We have a continuum of stress, okay? And not all stress is bad. Some stress is a very positive stress. You see here in this green area, the continuum. When you have the stress of trying something new, but you're interested, you're curious, the brain is growing at its maximum potential. Okay, and that's a very healthy stress. The first day of school, the first day of work, trying to learn to ride a bike, right? For the first time, but there's an enormous amount of connection that is happening in the brain. Now this is stress that's a little bit more intense. It's happening a little bit more regularly, but it's something that you recover from fairly quickly. It's not prolonged. Okay, so think about tolerable stress like starting a new job, moving, your first day at school, you know, sometimes even the pandemic for some of us can be somewhat tolerable. It's been long, but we've been able to kind of manage through some things. And then we have toxic stress. And also in the pandemic, for some of us, this stress has become much more toxic. And it's continuous every day, where you're dealing with things like fear, or we're talking about things like abuse, right? That can be toxic stress. It's continuous, long-term, consistent. This type of stress is actually extremely unhealthy for the brain, and it actually causes physiological reactions inside the body, which we're going to talk about in a second. Tolerable stress can also become toxic stress, which is an important thing to keep in mind. And oftentimes when you talk to individuals who have autism, they will tell you that they're living in a constant mode of stress. So some of the way that they experience the sensory world, maybe because of some of the racing thoughts, sometimes because people are not understanding them and attuning to them and being responsive, right? And we're doing things not because we want to, but just because we don't know. We are doing things that create more stress and more harm in the lives of a child with autism or an individual with autism. So it's important to be able to kind of think about this. I think therapy can be stressful for parents as well as it is for children. Think about I was reading some of the posts on the stress community board that we set up at the expo, and think about this for your child right now has been so difficult, and that can lead to difficulty with sleep. It could lead to difficulty with digestion and being able to eat, and it can have lasting effects on your body. So it's important to kind of think about the stress when we're thinking about how we're interacting and when we're doing any type of therapy or play, with individuals, with all green to yellow, and try not to move up the continuum. So in the long-term impact of toxic stress, so these are the type of things over to the left that you see happen when you have elevated excessive stress. You're going to have increased heart rate, increased blood pressure, stress hormones are producing all the time. And that can impair brain architecture, the immune status of an individual, and metabolic systems. Okay. This is a whole life perspective. So from conception to death, if you're having these type of chronic stress happening that's toxic, you'll see in this little pyramid, we're talking at the base like adverse childhood experiences, okay? Poverty are some things to kind of think about, or lack of food and roof, and to disruptive neurodevelopment, right? If it's long term and it isn't buffered, it can lead to social, emotional, cognitive impairments, which then leads to high risk behaviors, which leads to then disease and social problems, right? Again, this is typical development, but I think it's important for us to think about this, at least to be mindful of it for individuals who have autism, because they can also be experiencing some of these type of things. So I also want to kind of point out the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system and how this kind of functions, because in autism, you're going to see some of the things kind of align here. The parasympathetic system is the rest and digest system of our central nervous system. And the sympathetic system is our fight, flight, or freeze part of our nervous system. When the fight, flight, or freeze is activated, you're going to see things like the eyes dilate, reduce elevation. Okay, your heart rate is going to speed up and your lungs are going to expand because it has to get ready to be able to respond to the stress incident at hand, right? The stomach slows down in digestion because you can't be feeling like, oh, I got to go to the bathroom, right? You gotta it starts slowing down the process, right? You begin to create more glucose in the liver to be able to get that fight or in the intestines. And then the kidneys also begin to kind of so we think about this because oftentimes we see children with autism have comorbid conditions associated with it. 80% of individuals with autism have some kind of digestive issue, right? We have feeding issues and sleep issues that can be somewhat related to the sympathetic system being stuck on the digestive system happens. Your pupils constrict, your lungs contract, your heart rate slows down, your speed of digestion, okay? You're releasing some bile to be able to help with the digestion, and the intestinal movement starts to kind of happen a little bit more. So it's important when you're starting to see some of these things to also kind of think a little bit about what is your child's level of stress. Not to say that this is the sole reason that your child is having or your loved one is having these issues, but at least to know that we don't want to contribute and make things a little bit harder on the system by stressing them out. So the role of responsive relationships, we come back to this. Responsive relationships help buffer the effects of stress. Okay, so when we think about the neuronal connections that are happening, and by the way, when a child is young, they are making about 1 million new connections in the brain every second. Every second. There is more connections in the brain than there are stars in the Milky Way. Just wrap your mind around that for a second, right? So they are primed for learning. Over time, the connections that are not used as much begin to kind of break away, right? They prune. It's called the pruning process because the brain has to be efficient. And the connections in the brain that are utilized more often kind of stay, and they're much more solid because they're thicker. So think about with the advancement of technology, how, for example, if I were to ask you your father's cell phone number, you might not know it. because our brains have changed. Before, we didn't have directories on our phones like we do now. We couldn't just tell Google to call somebody, right? And and uh, and so our brains had to remember all of the numbers. I still remember the number to my home when I was a kid, because I had to remember it all the time to pick up the payphone and call my parents to come get a ride, right? Uh, uh, as as the brain develops, relationships help kind of line and protect those neuronal connections, right? Think about it like electrical tape that gets wrapped around these connections to protect them and insulate them from being broken off. So that's really an important part of relationship. The relationship can help kind of soothe a child and protect them from some of the effects of stress. So even if they're dealing with tolerable stress or even toxic stress sometimes, they're resilient and they can overcome as long as they have responsive relationships. Okay, that will lead to really good engagement, which then leads to reciprocity, the serve and return. The Center for the Developing Child at Harvard has had a bunch of research. Dr. Jack Shankoff has had a bunch of research around serve and return. And that's the back and forth interactions between parents and children or caregivers and children that really build a foundation for learning and for dealing with stress. Once you have this engagement, reciprocity, then you have the elaboration of ideas and interaction. Kids begin a little bit more complex to be thinkers, right? They're much more creative in their thoughts once you have these other type of brain working. The executive functioning a little bit more, where an individual then can kind of be confronted with a stressful situation, but then they're going to stop. Let me think about how I'm going to approach this and act versus just reacting. And this is a really important thing because we really want to kind of help, support our children with autism to be able to do that type of stuff. And they're very capable of doing those type of things, so long as that we can attune to their individual way of being able to do things. Now, it's also important. This sounds, after that slide, I'm sure you're feeling like, wow, as a parent, that's a big responsibility on me. But know that it's really, really important to take care of yourself as a parent, right? There's going to be moments in this process through this journey, where it just all seems too overwhelming, right? Where you just kind of feel like, I don't know if I can do this. And that's why it's important for us as people who are around you, whether it be your therapist, whether it be a friend, your provider who's providing therapy for your child, to be here to support you, right? To kind of be able to kind of talk about the feelings, because sometimes you have to be able to kind of at least get them off your chest for a little bit, right? Because this is hard. It's important to acknowledge that this is very, very difficult. And so we want to make sure that, at our practice, we make it a central focus that we're taking care of you, the caregiver, right? If we're there for you, then you can be there and present for your child. I like to think about each one of us as having an emotional bank, right? It's kind of like a checking account for emotions. And every time you kind of get up and you say, all right, I'm going to go out and I'm going to go to my child's therapy today, you're making withdrawal from your emotional bank. Because nobody wants to go to therapy for their kid, right? And a lot of these therapies are really intense. You're going places, you're traveling far, you have to get your child ready, which can be difficult to get them out the door. So think about all the checks that you're cashing out of your emotional bank when you're doing those type of things. Not to mention, you have other kids maybe that you're having to support, your spouse, work, day-to-day things around the house, right? And so there's an enormous amount of stress. The research has shown that not only are we seeing more anxiety and stress in individuals who have autism, and I don't think we're doing enough to be able to address it, but we're also seeing an enormous amount of stress and anxiety in parents. And I also don't think we're doing enough to be able to address that. And so it's a critical thing. Take care of yourself. Give the moments. Sometimes if you don't feel like doing it, it's okay. Take a break, right? But make sure you surround yourself with supportive people because it does take a village. About the power of play. So, play. And play is a really important part of development. All important learning takes place within the context of play. Play is exploration, is trying new things. It helps children develop a sense of mastery of the world. And there's two key components to play. It's open-ended and it's fun, right? So play is not necessarily directed by us as parents. It's directed by the children, and then we can kind of expand on the play. And it's totally fun, right? You should be having shared enjoyment when you're doing it. Sometimes at the beginning, it's a little struggle to kind of figure out what is the right style of play for your child, because each person is different. But attuning to that play, and having somebody to help you figure out the ins and outs of where is the right level to play with your child, you'll start to have that shared enjoyment, and they'll just immediately connect. And that's when you're having the neurons firing on all cylinders. Think about the connections in the brain are being created by experiences. It's the relationship that makes them strong, and it's play that ignites them to be able to take off, at their maximum potential. So everyday moments are brain building moments. Now this is critically important because, as I said before, this is stressful for parents, and I don't know about you guys, but when my kids were young, I didn't have a whole heck of a lot of time, right? We were just trying to get by, survive with sleep and all the different things that we were trying to do day to day, making sure that we're fed. Gosh, there was times where I'd get through the day and I was like, wait, did I feed the child? Like, oh my gosh, I'm a child development specialist, right? It's my my job to know child development. I'm forgetting to feed my child, right? This is hard stuff. So we want to make sure that we don't layer on more stress and more work on you. And so we talk about for children with autism, the need for intensity. High intensity is really important. I just did a training in terms of the intensity requirements, right? That we want to make sure that interventions for children with autism are intensive. But there's certain ways of being able to do this where you can kind of work smarter, not harder. And those are, good. But you also want to be able to go ahead and, make sure that you're not adding more onto your plate than is needed, right? So think about integrating learning and working with somebody that can integrate learning into your everyday moments at home, right? Play should be easy, friendly, and relaxing, right? And it's a feeding time. There's a bunch of play things that can be done so that you're doing things with greater intention around the time that you're feeding your child. And it's something that you have to do multiple times a day, right? Changing the child's clothing presents a wonderful of opportunities for being kind of silly and playful, right? Sometimes I tell parents, if they're still at the stage where their child needs to be dressed, do something silly, and as long as the child is at the stage where they can do this with you, and it doesn't stress them out too much, be playful and put a sock on their hand and be like, oh, that doesn't go there, right? And they got to kind of problem solve how to be able to get it back off, or put a pair of pants, over the, like, trying to put them on their arms or something like that, and then having to try and correct you. When you're at the stage where they can kind of stay in engagement and they're beyond regulation, they're starting to do some social problem solving. These are great activities to kind of infuse into everyday life, right? Bath time can be a very calming time for kids, and you can work on regulation. Again, depending on the individual, if bath time is a regulating moment for them. Some kids love the water, other ones don't. But again, it's about making the most out of your everyday moments. I've been able to work with parents where making the bed is a great time to be able to get some sensory input, right? And for some of us, it's something that we do all the time. Some of us, not so much, but you get the idea. Make everyday moment count. The next strategy and tip that I want to give around play is to do something that an old professor of mine told me. He would say, hurry up and do nothing. The very first thing that we can do as caregivers to an individual with autism is to wait. Keep calm, wait, watch, and wonder. Okay? We want to resist the urge to jump right in. We want to respect the individual and what they're going through. And oftentimes they hold the solution of what to do. They're giving you clues, right? And so just watch for a second and see what the interest is that they're in, because that's going to be your in to be able to kind of play and interact, right? If the child likes trains, then we're going to be all about the trains, right? Um, uh, Ron Kaufman, who talks about the Sunrise program, he often talks about doing things like this, right? Like if your child likes trains, then you become as a way to be able to kind of get that connection. Okay, be a keen observer of what everything that that child does has a purpose and a function. That's communication. Okay, eye for observation. Identify your child's interests, because those are going to be really critical to be able to kind of help get the play moving forward. And see what your child is trying to do and provide just enough support to help them achieve their goal. Following these little steps are going to really help you be able to kind of get a connection, stay attuned to their pacing, and you're going to kind of just work right outside of that zone of comfort. Like I said, you're going to kind of go from the 10-pound weight to the 15-pound weight. And little by little, you're going to kind of stretch while respecting what they need as individuals and not activating the stress system. Another key thing to do is follow the leader. Okay? Get on your child's level. Join in on their play, whatever is their interest, and allow your child to kind of direct the play for you a little bit. Okay? It's going to be the easiest way not to kind of stress them out. And then you imitate them in what they're doing. And you'll notice I've been able to do this with kids. Or sometimes, let's say they're struggling with eye contact, and they may be doing something like I don't know. I've had boys who like to spin something, let's say, and so then I will spin it, with them and say, "Oh, I love to spin too, and I could probably even do it better. Watch this, zoom, right?" And we're spinning things around, and then they kind of are looking at it, and they kind of look at you like, "Oh, you got something I like." Right? And then they kind of give it to you, and you begin to get that kind of back and forth, interaction, which again, from a brain perspective, serve and return is where it's at, right? The circles of interaction going back and forth is where you're making the strongest connections in the brain for learning. Now, it doesn't mean that you get stuck in that thing, You can do it for a while as long as the child needs, and then maybe you present a new idea. Maybe you roll the thing that typically turns, and you taught them a new way to play. Again, just slightly outside the comfort zone. Always respecting if they tell you no, back up and go back to what you were doing before. It's not time yet. Okay? So become a learning ally that way. Okay? You're in this process together. Okay? It's like a dance, and you're going back and forth. And each time you're kind of going a little bit farther down the dance floor. Here's a couple of things to avoid. Okay? Avoid directing your child's play too much. You want to give them some ideas, you want to help with a couple of things, but not to the level that you're creating stress. Okay? Try on commands that you're giving. Okay? Because that could be really stressful, right? Think about if you're trying to take a test and somebody's, giving you commands quickly. All right, the timetables, right? I only say that because I was horrible at math. 15 times 20, go. 20, 25 times 30, go, right? And you're trying to do that. It elevates the fight or flight response. And even if you know the information, sometimes it can make it very, very difficult for you to be able to recall and use it. So kind of be aware of your pacing, okay? Not too much quizzing of the child. Try not to force too much togetherness, okay? Development is something that is nourished, not forced, okay? We can't teach development, but we can definitely create the conditions around it to be able to work at its maximum, function, okay, at its maximum output. And so try not to force it togetherness, but invite. A long time ago, I had worked with a mother who had talked to me about having a challenge. The goal that she wanted was just to be able to get a hug from her son and not it be, like he had to do it. She wanted a meaningful hug for him to give it to her. And as we started kind of working together, I started noticing that, for him visually, it was overpowering to see somebody coming at him. For her, she seemed like a giant, you know, as she was coming at him, and it kind of threw him off. And so instead of forcing the togetherness, we started inviting him to come for the hug. And she kind of sat back. I kind of taught her where to position herself in space, distance wise, and then would offer the hug. And then he'd come close, then he would leave. But we would always offer the hug, and we'd always respect the distance. Over time, as we started doing this, he got closer and closer, and eventually he came into that warm embrace. And let me tell you guys, that was probably the proudest moment of my life. This is why I do what I do. To have that shared connection. They both held each other in an embrace. Mom cried, I cried. It was great. I can guarantee you, you don't have to force togetherness. You'll be much better off if you just invite. So a couple last things as we're getting close to kind of wrapping up, and then I'd be happy to kind of take any questions and stay on a little bit. If anybody has any, you can pop them up in the chat. But we want to present new challenges. Think about like this pizza dough that this person is making. You got to kind of stretch slowly and kind of turn the dough, work it, right? If you start stretching too quickly and you're doing too much at once, it's not going to come out. You're not going to have a nice pizza. It's going to be all crooked. You're going to rip the dough, okay? Development is a lot like that. So read your child's cues. How far are they willing to kind of try something? Can you get to a positive stress level? Offer invitations to play. Again, not force, but just present them. And don't feel bad if your child tells you no. You know, it's okay. We'll come up with another idea later, right? Go for curiosity. Try and build a curiosity on something and woo the child to be able to engage with you, okay? So sometimes new challenges can have that positive stress if it's really, really kind of interesting to them and say, I like the way this looks. I'm interested in trying to figure out how it works. I'm going to join you. Sometimes make mistakes, right? Very natural ones. So your child is asking you for something to drink, right? Okay, go grab a cup, give it to them, and forget to put something in it. Oh, man. Now you presented a new challenge. Now they got to tell you, wait, there's nothing in my cup, right? Whether it's with a gesture or they point or they tell you milk or juice, right? You start to create a new challenge to get that interaction kind of going back and forth and begin to build new neurons in the brain. Another strategy is to use wait time and pauses. And present fun play ideas. Again, sometimes this waiting, just kind of going at their own pace can be really, really helpful. And above all, have fun. So I'll leave you with this final little quote that I really enjoy. And I think it really kind of gets to the heart of what we're talking today. It goes like this. I tried to teach my child with books. She gave me only puzzled looks. I tried to teach my child with words. They passed her often unheard. Despairingly I turned aside. How shall I teach this child? I cried. Into my hands she put the key. Come, she said. Play with me. So go out and play, guys. Enjoy your time together. If you're at the expo, enjoy the expo. Come talk to us. I'm glad to chat with you more and give you ideas and find out what's going on in your guys' lives. If you're on YouTube, go ahead and put some comments in the chat. We can take a look at them afterwards. You can always reach out to me by contacting me through our website, email address, phone number, or any of the social media links below. I hope you guys found this helpful and that it helps you have more meaningful connections and that you're starting to kind of think about the brain when you're working with your child. So thank you, everybody. And hopefully, if you guys like this, just let me know and hit those like buttons, I guess, and we'll try and I'll try and do some more. Okay. Thanks a lot. And this morning to kind of hear this presentation and